At one moment, I was at this party, and the next moment, I was in this black void, and I was moving forward at a very rapid speed. I couldn't calculate how fast, but it seemed like at the speed of light. And as I traveled and went down this tunnel, there was a large opening. And at the very end, I could see a light. And I heard this rumbling sound. And I've never heard it before or since. And it should have been terrifying, but it wasn't. It was very soothing, actually. It was low rumbling, almost like I was in an earthquake in the Philippines when I was in the military. And I equate it to that, but it was much more than that. And as I was moving forward, I kept having this thought in my mind: I'm about to learn the secret meaning of life. And as I got near the light, closer to the light, I came out the end of what I guess I would call a tunnel. To me, I never thought of it as a tunnel back then, but since then, I've thought of it that way. And as I came out of the tunnel, I could see beautiful valleys and flowers and trees and rivers and streams. And there were flowers that were below me, and I was traveling above them. And as I looked down at these flowers, some of them were very, very big. How big, I don't know, but I mean, really, really big. Not like we would see flowers here, the size of a house, maybe, you know? And they were all making this wonderful music, or at least it seemed like it was coming from them. It was coming through the air and into me. And I had the understanding that these flowers, all this life, was there to support me, both physically and I guess what I would call spiritually now, although I didn't think of it that way then. And as I moved forward, I was thinking to myself, I don't have a body. I'm free of a body, but I didn't feel like I was losing anything. I felt my presence. Actually, I felt a stronger presence than I had ever felt before. And up above on the right, there were three very tall beings of light. And when I say beings, they were indistinct as to their features. They didn't have very clear faces, but I could clearly tell that they were beings. And they were maybe, if I had to guess, 10, 15, 20 feet tall. I don't know. They were very tall. And they were very welcoming. And they began to communicate with me in a way that I guess many people would call it telepathy. But back then, when it happened to me, again, this is 1972. So I had no reference. I had never read anything about an NDE. I knew nothing. I just knew that these people, these beings, were communicating to me that I was about to meet a being of a high order. And as they were letting me know this, I could see off in the distance a tiny point of light, but it was very brilliant. And it became closer and closer until it enveloped all of us and me. And it wrapped me in this feeling of warmth and acceptance and love is the right word. And it was as if I had come home. That's what it felt like. Like somewhere inside of me, I was saying, I'm home again. And this being began to communicate to me, and it was clear that any questions I had in my mind, and again, this isn't through verbal language, there's no language there. It's simply, if I were to think something as if, well, I'll give you an example. One of the questions that formed in my mind was, are there other worlds with life on them in the universe? And before the thought could even really form in my mind, I was traveling at an incredible speed and looking down on these planets where there was clearly life, where I could see beings, where I could see people walking and moving. I saw all of this from up above. I didn't really see it. I didn't go down like on the level of the street or the planets. It was watching down upon it. And some of these civilizations were what I would call modern, and some would be what I would call maybe ancient, what I perceived as maybe like Roman type of garb, that from thousands of years ago. And when we returned, I had many questions, and the primary question I had was the one that I knew I was going to get an answer to when I was first moving down that tunnel. And I said, what is the real meaning of life? And as I asked it, I was filled with this knowledge. And it's the only way we can explain it here. I can't explain it any other way, because if I just said the word love, it sounds so one-dimensional. It sounds silly, but it wasn't that. It was the opposite of that. It was this magnificent, wonderful understanding that the meaning of life is love. And the meaning of life meant everything. It didn't mean just me or the being. It didn't mean, it just meant everything, all of creation. And I understood everything there so clearly and fully, like I could never do here. I feel like I don't have 1% of the ability, not even close to that, to perceive things the way I perceived them there and then. And I had a lot of questions. And as I asked these questions, there was this sense of total acceptance. There was no judgment whatsoever. Not that I expected any. I didn't expect to be there. That was the last thing I would have expected, was to be in front of these beings. But I also understood that the joy in me was so strong that this great being in front of me was feeling that joy and sharing it with me, and actually laughing in a way, not physically laughing like we do here, but however I can best describe it is just total joy from the being connecting to me and back to the being. And at some point, I remember my presence, my spirit, my being started doing flips in the air. And this being just found that incredibly funny, in a good way, though. It wasn't like the being was laughing at me. The being was sharing that moment of joy with me. And at some point, and I'm not quite clear what happened, I feel there were things that might have happened in between that I don't recall, but I don't know that for sure. But at some point, we moved. And again, I don't know if the great being and the three beings moved with me, but I feel that the three beings, I feel at least one of those three beings was female. I feel that. And I felt like the great being was male. That is just how I didn't really stop and think about it. And this great being, this great light and source of joy and love, didn't really have features. It was a body, or I perceived it as a body, him as a body, it. But it wasn't as if I could see the features. I didn't see eyes or a nose, but I almost sensed them. I could almost sense them. Maybe that's what I expected to see because I'm from Earth. And then we moved over to this black, I guess you would call it a void. It was like we were in some area of the universe, and it should have been scary again, because when I think about it, it sounds barren and desolate, but really it was just such a warm, comforting feeling every moment of my time there. And in front of me, this giant tablet came spinning. I don't know how to describe it, like a stone tablet, like some tablet made of light. And on the tablet, the history of the world played out in front of me. And from the creation through eons, and I guess the end of the world. And I always tell people, no, I don't know how the world ends. I don't. If I did, I don't remember it. But I saw a lot of things happen in a millisecond. I saw centuries go by, but I absorbed them instantly. It's hard to describe. I can remember very clearly, though, and this, I don't know if it horrified me, but thinking back on it, it seemed terrible. Armies just clashing against each other, just armies rising up and clashing, and disasters, all these things, and good things, I assume, too. But it happened so rapidly, but my mind was able to absorb the information in a way, it couldn't be done here. It just couldn't. And I understood, there was somehow an understanding that I was deeply connected to the world, to everything around me, and that was connected to me. Exactly how I understood that, I don't know. I just understood it. And then at some point, it became clear to me that they wanted me to go back to the world. But I had no intention of doing that. I knew I was home and I was not going to leave. And I don't remember clearly what I articulated, how I spoke this, or I couldn't speak, but how I communicated this, but I think I was probably pretty adamant that, you know, I'm staying. And all these beings, there were, I've tried to think of the number of them over the years. And by the way, this was 50 years ago. This was 50 years ago, half a century. But in my mind, in my life, it remains the clearest memory I've ever had in my entire life, far beyond any other memory I've ever had in my life. But all these beings, there were thousands, maybe, there were at least hundreds of light surrounded me. And they began to sing this spontaneous music. And when I say sing, I didn't see their mouths. I didn't even see their mouths move because I didn't see their mouths. It emanated from them. Like everything there was emanating light, energy, and sound. And it was all part of the same thing. So there was no separation from sound, energy, light, knowledge. It was all omnipresent. And as they made this beautiful music that I can't even begin to guess would be like in the world. And I've been a musician for many years, so I know a little bit about music. But as they began to sing and praise me, they praised me, sending me off to return to Earth on some sort of mission or for some reason that I assume, this is an assumption on my part, was removed from my memory, because I have no memory of them saying, well, you have to go back for this reason or you have to go back for that reason. It didn't happen that way for me. It just, one moment I was saying, I'm not going to leave. And the next moment I agreed to leave. So, and they sent me off in magnificent fashion as if, I don't know, as if I were some sort of great being, to be honest with you. I know that sounds egoistic. I don't mean it that way. I just mean it was the most amazing thing that ever happened in my life.